Today's stream will be essentially speaking about an interesting article I came across regarding the UK's involvement in F-35 parts. So, what I'm going to do is mention the article, and from that point onwards, we will dissect it according to some very basic, rudimentary chat GPT prompts. So, let me just pull up the article on my. This article is about the court case. Excuse me. It's about the court case regarding the UK sending F-35 parts to Scumrail. Many of us have zero clue that approximately 500 parts was sent in December last year. And I'll share that article in a second. In a nutshell, the legal system is set up in a sense to serve those who have those who serve them, if that makes sense. The reason Prince Andrew's a free man and Epstein, who never killed himself, wasn't, is because certain royalties have so called privilege. It's not privilege, it's tyranny. But of course, they will misguide you on these definitions. For those who of you on YouTube and Instagram, if you joined the live stream yesterday, I spoke about new definitions because democracy, international law, humanitarian law, justice, and these things, they don't exist anymore. They don't exist. And it's up to us to define them. Anyway, okay, here we go. So this is a BBC article first and foremost, which is extremely misleading, as you can see here. F-35 parts exports to Scumrail are lawful, High Court rules. How true is that? Well, let's see, shall we? The UK's High Court has rejected a case brought by campaigners trying to stop the transfer to Scumrow of all British-made spare parts for US-produced F-35 fighter jets, saying it didn't have the constitutional authority to intervene. The government suspended 30 arms export licenses to Israel last September because of a risk of UK-made weapons being used in violation of international law in the Gaza Strip. So, pause. A risk that UK parts might be used in violation of international law. So already the assumption was that these parts could be, implying that the next clause, which is used in violation of international law. So they already acknowledge that the Jenny side is unlawful. It breaks all international law, whatever that means now. Last September. So it was suspended at the time. However, quoting the article now, but the UK supplies components to global pool of F-35s which Israel can access. The government had argued it could not pull out of the defense program without endangering international peace. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch expressed their dismay at the ruling. Both groups had intervened in the case, So, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. I personally do not trust them entirely because though their reporting is very thorough and detailed as well as comprehensive, the individuals behind the organization I'm extremely skeptical of. I'm not going to go into detail today about them, but what I would say is, in any case, all right, they're part of this story now. The horrifying reality in Gaza is unfolding in full view of the world. Entire families obliterated, civilians killed in so called safe zones, hospitals reduced to rubble, and a population driven into starvation by a cruel blockade and forced displacement, said Sasha Deshmukh, chief executive of Amnesty International. Sasha Deshmukh. Let's do a quick early life check on this person, shall we? Born in London, age 50, mother is Indian, dad is Pakistani, immigrated to UK in 60s, personal life 97, founding member of communications agency AS Bliss, 2001 he moved to Stonewall, director of parliamentary affairs, said led a successful campaign to equalize adoption laws, reform historic sexual offenses, abolish Section 28, which banned the discussion of sexuality in schools. Oh, so he was involved in abolishing Section 28, which had banned the discussion of sexuality in schools and started the debate that led to the introduction of civil partnerships and equal marriage laws in the UK. 2003, he returned to AS Bliss as managing director to lead its trade sale to advertising company WCRS Limited in 2005, forming the Engine Group. He led the corporate communications agency in the Engine Group for 7 years until 2012. 2013, Deshmukh became executive director of the UK Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. In late 2013, he became founding chief executive of campaign supporting the rollout of smart meters across Great Britain. In 2020, he became the CEO of UNICEF UK. In May 2021, he became the CEO, chief executive of Amnesty International UK. Hang on, is this guy apparently is gay? I know we're going on a tangent here, but right. This judgment does not change the facts on the ground, nor does it absolve the UK government of its responsibilities under international law. The two judges said the case was not about whether the UK should supply arms and other military equipment to Israel because the government had decided it shouldn't. They were being asked to decide on a particular issue whether the UK must withdraw from a specific multilateral defense collaboration because of the prospect that some UK manufactured parts may be supplied to Israel and used in contravention of international law in the conflict in Gaza. So, what they're exactly saying is that some parts might be used, however, it doesn't affect a fact essentially that the UK is collaborating. UK is collaborating, sadly, but not surprisingly. Under our constitution, that acutely sensitive and political issue is a matter for the executive, which is democratically accountable to parliament and ultimately to the electorate, not for the courts. Right, so let me read this again. Under our constitution, that acutely sensitive and political issue is a matter for the executive, which is democratically accountable to parliament and ultimately to the electorate, not for the courts. Right, so they're accountable to the parliament, not to the courts. Do you see how they play and twist words here? Crazy. UK's industry, UK industry makes 15% of every F-35 according to the Campaign Against the Arms Trade. Oxfam, which provided evidence to the court, said it is unconscionable that the government would continue to license the sale of components for F-35 jets, knowing they are used to deliberately attack civilians in Gaza and destroy their means of survival, including vital water supplies. Let me read that again. Oxfam, again, who I don't trust, states they provided evidence to the court saying it is unconscionable that the government will continue to license the sale of components for F-35 jets, knowing they are used deliberately using they are used to deliberately attack civilians in Gaza and destroy their means of survival, including vital water supplies, which is a human right. And did you know in 2021, food was being voted as a human right? Two countries voted against it: USA and Scumrow. Surprise, surprise. The case was brought by Al Haq, a group based in the Israel occupied West Bank, and the Global Legal Action Network against the Department for Business and Trade. So we had the Al Haq group representing a group, pardon me, based in West Bank in Palestine, and the Global Legal Action Network. What is the Global Legal Action Network? Let's check it out, shall we? They're lawyers in Lincoln's Inn. So there's various temples, and there's the Gray's Inn, Lincoln Inn, Middle Temple, and Lower Temple, or Upper Temple, something like that. Right, so these are lawyers based in Lincoln's Inn. The court said that Business Minister Jonathan Reynolds was faced with the blunt choice of accepting the F-35 carve out, right? So now they're bringing in the conversation of economy. if the UK does not send these parts to Scumrow, if these parts are not sent to Scumrow, 15% of the economy is gonna go out the window. So there's an economic scare about this. They're literally installing fear, in a sense. Or withdrawing from the F-35 program and accepting all the defense and diplomatic consequences which would ensue. So this sentence has implicitly within it the notion that if Britain is not consistently sending F-35s, Israel will do something really, really, really dark. The government also argued pulling out of the defense program could undermine US confidence in UK and NATO. But hang on a second, I thought the UK was a democratically free country. We're not really interested in terms of being governed by anyone else, you know. The whole give me liberty or give me death concept, which is a fascinating notion because nowadays the libertarians are at conflict with the idea, traditional libertarians, of an external entity dictating every entity within their space. And then the external entity not only dictates everything within the sphere and the entities that exist within the sphere, but the external entity is forces the internal entities to fund the external ones. Does that make sense? Okay, let me give you an example. So many to choose from. I'm just thinking which one. Which must I go with? USA is a sphere. The public's data being handled by a department in America. That's the internal entity. And another internal entity on paper is a company called, I don't know, let's say Palantir. Palantir closely linked to the external entity, let's say Scumrow. They work in unison, essentially, right? And when people found out the nature of Palantir and what's happening with their data and so on and so forth, rest was assured that don't worry, they're not they're not lethal, they're not harmful. It's fine. Relax, calm yourself. But if you read the history of Palantir, you see AI being one of their only customers for many years, and then someone like Peter Thiel, who essentially launched Vance's career, and they've been trying to get Vance to become the president since 2017, right? And then you see his influence from PayPal, time out PayPal. And then you see this Alex Karp person who wants fentanyl induced urine to be sprayed over his enemies. He dreams about killing people. This is all on record. Unaliving, sorry, unaliving people. So this entity, external entity, has so much influence on the internal one that the internal entity ends up controlling the sphere. And the sphere, by virtue of the internal entity, funds the external entity, and it keeps putting pressure on the whole sphere. And libertarian, let's pull up the definition. I'm going to use the Britannia definition. Right, libertarianism, the philosophy behind the third largest political party. Mm, 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 mm. In politics, libertarianism is a political philosophy, okay? Political philosophy that emphasizes individual liberty and autonomy. So, many of you have probably heard of Orwellian Nightmare, Orwell's book 1984, which I think I have somewhere. So it's a novel, essentially. And that's where you no longer have autonomy. You are constantly being surveilled. And keep in mind, George Orwell wrote about this decades ago, way ahead of his time, no doubt. So, libertarianism is a political philosophy that emphasizes individual liberty and autonomy with a strong focus on limiting the role of the governed. Libertarians generally believe that individuals should be free to make their own choices and pursue their own interests with minimal interference from the state. So, what I just talked about earlier is the state essentially becoming an entity for the external entity that appears to be a separate sphere. Anyway, the atrocities we are witnessing in Gaza are precisely because governments don't think the rules should apply to them, said Yasmin Ahmed, UK Director of Human Rights Watch. So, Yasmin Ahmed, let's see her background. Yasmin Ahmed, the UK Director of Human Rights Watch, she has 2 decades of experience as a public international lawyer, human rights advocate. In her current role, she advocates for the United Kingdom's foreign and domestic policies to be consistent with human rights. Yasmin is a well-known human rights commentator, regularly appears on BBC, Sky Times, Al Jazeera, other broadcasters, basically propaganda outlets. And her comments have featured in The Guardian, Independent Times, Washington Post. Prior to Human Rights Watch, Yasmin was executive director of the multi-award winning Human Rights Watch, Human Rights Organization, Rights and Security International. She worked as a public international lawyer for the UK and Australian governments and the UN and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavian Serious Crimes Unit in Timor-Leste. She started her career supporting asylum seekers and refugees in Australia. She is a Chevening scholar, has an LLM in Public International Law from the University of London, and has taught Public International Law at the School of Oriental and African Studies and the University of Adelaide, South Australia. She also worked as an associate to a judge of the Supreme Court of South Australia and qualified as a solicitor, former solicitor of England, Wales, and barrister and solicitor of Australia. It's quite a heavy duty amount of experience behind this person. But then again, it makes no sense with all this influence and not much is to be made. In fact, as I mentioned, definitions must be made now. New definitions, new individuals, Muslim definitions are to be made. Judicial deference to the executive in this case has left the Palestinians in Gaza without access to the protection of international law, despite the government and the court acknowledging that there is a serious risk that UK equipment might be used to facilitate or carry out atrocities against them. The government says it will continue to keep its defense exporting licenses under review. So they're like, well, we're going to review our license. Here in England, if you violate a trade which requires a license, let's say taxi, in prison instant. Here, not so much. The court has upheld this government this government's thorough and lawful decision making on this matter. Lawyers for the human rights groups are considering if they can find grounds to appeal. So this article is extremely misleading. And it makes zero sense. Right, so what I did, I was like, okay, let me just go on ChatGPT and see what exactly situation is, you know. So sorry about that. Just trying to load the chat. Okay, so after reading that, Walaikum Assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother Yusuf Hussain. Welcome, welcome. Ahlan, sahlan. When it's gonna start? Sorry, I don't understand your question, my brother. I am just outlining the article, pardon me, the ruling that came out. This article, ये article कल रात को ही publish हुई. UK complicit in exporting F-35. It started now. It started now. F-35 parts the UK is providing to Scumrow. All I'm talking about is the political philosophy of libertarianism and how this article is misleading and how the individuals like Human Rights Watch are also a bit misleading here. So I went on ChatGPT and I did a very basic research into this a bit more. Yes, I can speak Urdu. So I'll speak a mix of both those on Instagram and so on YouTube. یہ جو کیس ہے کہ یونائٹڈ کنگڈم نے F-35 جو جہاز ہے جو اس وقت سب سے ایڈوانس جو طیارہ ہے کسی بھی ملٹری اپلیکیشن میں کسی بھی جنگ میں استعمال ہو رہی ہے اس وقت F-35 ہے F-22 بھی استعمال ہو رہی ہے F-16 اور F-12 I think F-14 but F-35 سب سے ایڈوانس. Now the problem here is that the United Kingdom کا جو 15% 15% جو اکانومی ہے وہ ڈیفینس پہ ڈپینڈ ہے. ڈیفینس سے مراد bombs, guns, weaponry, sensor systems, radar systems, so on and so forth. So دو گروپ, ایک الحق کے نام سے جو ویسٹ بینک فلسطین سے ہے, اور ایک اور گروپ GLAN گلوبل لیگل ایکشن نیٹورک. یہ یہاں لنڈن میں ہے اور ان کے ممبران کافی سارے آئرش ہے. اور آپ نے نوٹس کیا ہوگا یا نہیں نوٹس کیا کہ جو آئرش ہیں وہ فلسطینی کاز کے ساتھ بہت مخلص اور قریب ہیں. کیوں؟ کیونکہ ایک وقت تھا آج سے تقریباً قبل لیس دین 100 years ago, 100 سال بھی نہیں ہوئے, یونائٹڈ کنگڈم اسی طرح بیریئر لگا کے لوگوں کے زبردستی کرفیو لگا کے, آئرلینڈ کی بات کر رہا ہوں, ڈبلن میں, بیلفاسٹ میں, ان کو زبردستی آکیپائی کرنے کی کوشش کی. ہوا کیا کہ دو گروپ نہیں سوری ایک گروپ بن گیا IRA کے نام سے, آئرش ریزسٹنس آرمی. جیری ایڈمز GERRY ایڈمز بندہ تھا, اس نے لیڈ کیا یہ ساری ریولیوشن کہہ لو آپ. اس نے اس ریولیوشن میں آبجیکٹیو یہ تھا کہ برٹش کو نکالو یہاں سے. ہمیں پتہ ہے ان کی حرکتیں کیسی ہیں, بات کو گھما پھرا کے جو ہے نا اپنی مرضی اینڈ آف دا ڈے ہوتی ہے. ایکسکیوز می. مثلاً جو یہاں انگلینڈ آ جاتا ہے, کوئی امریکہ آیا تھا, وہ ایک خواب دکھایا جاتا ہے کہ جی آپ کے پاس فریڈم ہے, ہیومن رائٹس ہیں, آپ تعلیم سیکھیں, بزنس کریں, اور فینٹاسٹک, صاف پانی ہے, انٹرنیٹ ہے, گیس ہے, بس بیسک ہیومن رائٹ. ابھی میں نے ذکر کیا تھا, دوبارہ ذکر کر لیتا ہوں کہ 2021 میں یونائٹڈ نیشنز جو ایک اور فراڈولنٹ کلو فراڈ پورا فراڈ کمپنی گروپ جو ہے, آرگنائزیشن جو ہے یونائٹڈ نیشن, 2021 میں انہوں نے وہ ووٹ کر رہے تھے کہ جی فوڈ جو ہے, کھانا, وہ ایک ہیومن رائٹ ہے. اب بندہ پوچھے یار اس کے لیے آپ کو لیگل ڈیفینیشنس کی کیا ضرورت ہے, یہ تو بڑی obvious سی بات ہے. طعام المسکین جو اللہ تعالیٰ نے قرآن پاک میں سورۃ البقرہ میں جس کا ذکر کیا کہ ایک مسکین کو, طعام عربی میں کہتے ہیں کھانے کو, لیکن اب ہیومن رائٹس اور سوری یونائٹڈ نیشنز کو فکر پڑے. دو ملک ہیں جنہوں نے اس کے اگینسٹ ووٹ دیا تھا. ایک وہ ملک ہے اسکمرو جس کو میں بولتا ہوں, اور ایک ہے یونائٹڈ اسٹیٹس. بس وہ دن اور آج کے دن کبھی فوڈ ہیومن رائٹ نہیں بنا. اچھا واپس چلتے ہیں اس पूरे सिलसिले में बात यह है कि जी इंग्लैंड में जो हाई कोर्ट है ना और जो जज बैठते हैं उनकी जो ट्रेनिंग होती है जिस एरिया में होती है ना उसको इन्स कहते हैं INN। लंदन में सबसे मशहूर जो है वो लिंकन इन, ग्रेज इन, GRAYS, क्योंकि जो कलर होता है GREY वो अलग है, GRAY ये नाम है। मिडल टेम्पल एंड आई थिंक लोअर टेम्पल उसको मैं हमें कहते हैं। सो यहाँ पे जाते हैं जजेस, इनकी ट्रेनिंग होती है, लीगल काउंसिल बैठती है, उसके बाद फिर आगे जाके हाई कोर्ट में जाके डिसीजन होती है और सीनियर बेंच होते हैं। अब मैं बताता हूँ ये क्यों रेलेवेंट है इन सब चीज़ों में, क्योंकि ये एक 72 पेज का डॉक्यूमेंट है जिसने बेसिकली चंद लफ्ज़ों में बताया था। उसका खुलासा इतना है कि जी UK इन्वॉल्व नहीं है इस जेनी असाइड में, इस नस्ल कुशी में। बस वो एक इकोनॉमी की मजबूरी है और इसके अलावा नेटो US अलायंस को साथ साथ रखने की मजबूरी है। तो जो डेमोक्रेटिक पार्लियामेंट प्रोसीजर्स है वो अप्लाई होती है, ये जनरल लॉ नहीं अप्लाई होती है इस सेंस में। ये बेसिकली रूलिंग। अब मैं बताता हूँ आपको, चैट जीपीटी को मैंने कहा द फॉलोइंग: act as a seasoned journalist and investigate the full list of lawyers and high court judges involved in the following। मैंने चैट जीपीटी को कहा कि एक इन्वेस्टिगेटिव जर्नलिस्ट की तरह बनो, सोचो और इन्वेस्टिगेट करो इस बात में, investigate the full list of lawyers and high court judges involved in this case because it's extremely misleading. Very quickly, this is the title, which is extremely misleading. F-35 parts export to Scumbrel are lawful. It's not lawful. They made it lawful. It was never the case. So anyway, moving forward now. Number one, the judges. Lord, pardon me, astaghfirullah. Now, the name of the judge is Stephen Mells. Stephen Mells is also part of the one of the inns. He's been trained there. He went there. Second judge is Karen Stein. Karen Stein, her father was also a judge, born in South Africa, and we all know South Africa was apartheid when he was born, right? Now these are the judges. These two judges, they preside over the case in the King's Bench Division, issuing the decisive 72-page ruling that executive decisions on national security and foreign policy fall outside judicial oversight. So when it comes to executive decisions, what does executive mean? You've heard of chief executive officer. You've heard of executive directors, right? Executive is someone who executes an action. That's why a chief executive officer, जो CEO होता है, उसके पास final decision होता है कि ये action final है। तो ये जजेस कह रहे हैं कि देखो, एग्जीक्यूटिव डिसीजंस जब नेशनल सिक्योरिटी और फॉरेन पॉलिसी की बात होती है, ये जुडिशियल जो जजेस की जजमेंट है ना, इससे बाहर है ये ज़रा। वाई? वेल वो एक्सप्लोर दैट इन अ मिनट। अदर साइड जो फ़लस्तीनियों के हक में है, वो एक अल हक ग्रुप जो मैंने बताया था, और GLAN, ग्लोबल लीगल एक्शन नेटवर्क, right? So number one is Philippa Kaufman. Number two is Raza Hussein. Raza Hussein, they led the legal challenge on behalf of Al Haq, supported by the GLAN. Like I mentioned, GLAN is a group of lawyers based in Lincoln's Inn, where they're all trained. Alongside interventions from Amnesty International scam, Oxfam scam, Human Rights Watch scam. In any case, again, this is what you have to understand as well. When you hear UN, when you hear Human Rights Watch. When you hear Amnesty International, yeah, it sounds nice, it sounds great, but their directors and the people who are leading these organizations, they have very questionable pasts and very questionable characters as well, right? Put it this way, यहाँ भी रिसेंटली और कल भी मैंने इस पे बात की थी कि यहाँ पे एक फेस्टिवल होता है ग्लास्टनबरी। ग्लास्टनबरी लाइव शो होता है, सब आते हैं लोग, बड़ा सा एक फील्ड होता है, ज़मीन होती है, स्टेज लगता है एंड सो ऑन। वो जी चंद लोग कह रहे थे कि जी डेथ डेथ टू द आईडीएफ, ठीक है, उसकी राय है। लो जी उसका वीज़ा भी कैंसिल, उसके बच्चों का एड्रेस भी एक्सपोज कर दिया, उसका एड्रेस भी एक्सपोज करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, लेकिन वो बंदा कह रहा है कि नहीं भाई मैं तो बोलूँगा ऐसी की तैसी। उसका जो एजेंसी है, द एजेंसी दैट वाज हैंडलिंग दिस म्यूजिक ग्रुप कॉल्ड बॉब डिलन, सॉरी बॉब विलन, वो भी सारे जो है ना यहूद हैं। तीन तीन शख्स हैं टॉप पे ना इस एजेंसी में, एजेंसी का नाम बोल रहा हूँ लेकिन आप चेक करें, गूगल है, यू फाइंड इट। They suspended, as in they cancelled all dealings and contracts with the music group। मतलब यूं चंद मिनटों में, दिनों में। ये ह्यूमन राइट्स कितने सालों से लगे हैं, कुछ भी नहीं निकल रहा और निकलेगा भी नहीं। Solar scam। Anyway, next one is Dirbla Manogue, senior lawyer at GLAN. She publicly reflected on the judge's deference to the executive on complex matters such as genocide assessments. So, what does that mean? Deference means in regard to, with respect to. So, she's trying to say that, hey, look, this attachment of a complex matter like genocide assessment has to be assessed by the High Court. So, why is this pushing? Why is this being pushed to the side? It obviously does make sense. Next lawyer fighting in the Palestinians' corner is Jenny Walker, featured in commentary in a conversation mirrored in the Al Jazeera video segment discussing the court's ruling. Right, so Jenny Walker just spoke about it. So now, so these were the judges: Stephen Mills, Karen Stein, and then we have the claimants. Now, the ones who are fighting the UK's Ministry of Ministry, sorry, Department of Business and Trade corner. James Eadie acted as lead counsel for the Department for Business and Trade. He argued that halting F-35 parts exports would risk undermining NATO and the broader partner supply chain. Oh, hang on a second. So, not supplying weapons to unalive and annihilate children and women and literally burning them alive. And yesterday, they attacked a cafe which was attacked last year in May, and a journalist, her brother died, well-known journalist, and she was severely injured. There's a famous picture of her shirt and her hair full of blood and whatnot. And the old couple, the uncle survived, but the auntie was completely finished. That's okay because we don't want to undermine the alliance with NATO and the broader supply chain. So I was like, hang on a second, broader supply chain. Let me step into the supply chain, shall we? Who's involved in this whole supply chain? Okay, number one, DE and S DECA. This is a UK Ministry of Defence agency handling maintenance, repair, and overhaul and upgrades of F-35 avionics and electronic components, central at Sealand, West, which is Wales, and Stafford, which is in the Midlands. So that's outlet number one. Okay, I am the genocide apartheid regime. This is Me, I want the imports. So to give you an idea of what's going on here, you have the UK Ministry of Defense. They're responsible for most of what's going on. Okay, so they're here in this illustration. Next is Lockheed Martin. Operates a UK integrated system office near Portsmouth that coordinates shipment of UK made parts. Example given: rare fuselage, ejection seats, and so on through RAF Marham. So now you have Lockheed Martin, right? Now Lockheed Martin are involved. So you have Lockheed Martin, which is a business, a corporation, कंपनी है ये लॉकहीड मार्टिन, कोई भी ट्रेडिंग कंपनी जैसे नाइक हो गया, KFC वगैरह. लॉकहीड मार्टिन, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ डिफेंस. Next, you have BAE Systems, have over 1900 plus suppliers globally that contribute to the F-35 program, with BAE Systems among top tier firms. So BAE Systems essentially is acting like a supplier and a research center for the technology. Okay, so now we have BAE Systems. So let's say, for instance, this is BAE Systems. BAE Systems. Hopefully, you kind of see what's going on here. Okay. Next, you have UK suppliers via the ADS group. So the ADS Trade Association lists aerospace and defense firms such as Airbus, Rolls-Royce, GE, GKN, MBDA as active participants in the supply chain. Oh, so ADS is a supply chain group. So they're involved in sea freight, air freight, so on and so forth. Right? Is that the case? It's a trade organization, right? Now, the actual transportation of F-35 once it's all made and designed and whatnot. RAF Marham, Marham. They're based in Norfolk. Okay, the primary shipping hub for UK-made F-35 parts, which are then flown to the US before entering global parts pool. So they go to the United States. So 1 second, the judge said we have to secure NATO alliance, and we cannot risk the supply chain, and we cannot risk basically business. So once everything is researched and made and developed and upgraded and repaired, all of this is set in motion to go to the US first. Okay, where in the US does it end up? Well, it ends up in the US Department of Defense holds title to all uninstalled F-35 parts, controlling onward distribution, including Scarborough. Oh, okay. So then they have depots, downstream, final destination, right? So Declassified UK, this is a journal, an online investigative journalist website, Declassified. They state, and they revealed over 500 UK to US shipments since October 2023, with at least 14 direct to Israel before restrictions were implemented. Who are the key personnel? Ministry of Defense Minister Maria Eagle oversaw UK's strategic F-35 role and defended global supply obligations. Wow. So DE and S DECA, formerly known as the Defense Electronic and Components Agency, DECA is a British agency, is an operating center within Defense Equipment and Support, DE&S, right? And in February 2025, the Ministry of Defense said, hey, we need to be part of the F-35 supply chain, so we're not interested in this genocide, whatever accusations. Next is Lockheed Martin UK leadership, coordinates licensing, export routing, and compliance. So the entire Lockheed company is involved, obviously. ADS Group executive Kevin Craven represent and lobby for UK Tier 1 suppliers. Okay, BAE Systems on their official website, February 2025. Okay, I mean, there's literally endless articles here. Endless articles here. If you wish to have them, you can go on my Instagram, Kersha Q, and you can find them. So, campaigners argue this renders UK made components complicit in civilian harm in Gaza, highlighting sovereignty and control vacuum. There is a vacuum. It's a vacuum. It's crazy. Final analysis a broad web of UK firms are involved, from avionics to DENS, DECA to manufacturing by Lockheed Martin BAE Systems. The export chain is heavily influenced, even controlled by the US, which holds legal ownership of spare parts and manages redistribution. UK policy permitting indirect exports effectively allows continuation of supply of vital components to Israel even after official restrictions, raising serious legal, ethical, political challenges. I mean, this is insane. But going back to the ruling, so this is some of the key grounds raised, right? The Arms Export Control Act and misuse of ministerial discretion, right? Grounds. The claimants argue that the Secretary of State unlawfully licensed F-35 parts exports to Israel, despite credible evidence that these parts would be used in actions breaching international humanitarian law. Doesn't exist. Key point. The UK's own consolidated criteria for arms exports states exports must be refused if there's a clear risk it might be used for serious violations of international humanitarian law. The Genocide Convention of 1948 states they argued that the UK government had credible grounds to believe Israel's conduct in Gaza constitutes a genocide, triggering obligations under the Genocide Convention, specifically not to aid or assist in genocide, to prevent genocide, and to punish genocide. So, according to UK law, essentially, according to UK law, UK is complicit in the genocide. Scary. Grounds. The claimant alleged ministers failed to properly assess independence evidence from the UN, ICJ, and human rights groups that documented systematic targeting of civilians and essential infrastructure. Judicial review grounds, irrationality and procedural impropriety. Okay, so where's the irrational side of things here? They argued the licensing decisions were irrational in that no reasonable decision maker could conclude there was no clear risk. Also, that the government failed to give reasons or consult Parliament properly. Why High Court rejected these grounds? The judges, Males and Stein, broadly held on arms export rules. The court said the decision is inherently political, relying on complex intelligence, military, and diplomatic advice. The courts deferred to the executive on national security. So, is UK's national security a threat? Yeah. Okay, continue. Basically, the argument. On the Genocide Convention, they agreed that the Genocide Convention is binding, but said it does not automatically prevent arms exports. The question is whether ministers reasonably believed there was a clear risk, and the court found no illegality in the minister's judgment. On evidence, the court acknowledged the ICJ's provisional measures against Israel, but found ministers were entitled to weigh this alongside military briefings and diplomatic priorities. Okay, court acknowledged ICJ provisional measures against Israel, but found ministers were entitled to weigh this alongside military briefings and diplomatic priorities. On irrationality, they found the claimants failed the high bar for irrationality. Decisions may be wrong or morally troubling, but not necessarily irrational in legal terms, if taken within the bounds of the statutory framework. Ramifications: why this shows a gap in international law enforcement. Now, this is interesting. Defense, sorry, deference means the genocide convention is toothless domestically. The case shows UK courts won't second guess ministerial security assessment, even if credible international bodies like ICJ have found plausible risk of genocide. Practical result: the convention's duty to prevent genocide is politically diluted. National security versus the IHL, the legal contradiction. By shielding arms trade under national security, governments can argue they must supply weapons to allies for alliance stability, even if there's a risk of misuse. This directly conflicts with peremptory norms of international law that forbids complicity in genocide. Okay. Conflict with imperial. Hmm. So clearly there's a contradiction which no one's looking to address. The convention's 1948 definition is narrow. It requires specific intent to destroy a group in whole or part, proving that intent is politically fraught and legally evasive. Many legal scholars argue modern warfare, siege tactics, and targeting civilian structures should meet a broader threshold. ICJ provisional orders reflect this evolving standard. The case highlights the limits of judicial review. Courts like the UK High Court do not do fact finding on active conflicts. They assess only whether the minister's process was lawful, not whether genocide is actually occurring. Okay, so the UK High Court says, hey, is this process legal or not? We don't care about if something is actually occurring, like genocide. That's insane. Oof. Suggested reforms. States should embed automatic arms export suspension if the ICJ or UN find a plausible genocide risk. Domestic courts should be empowered to make factual findings about genocide risk, not just review ministerial reasoning. The legal definition of genocide should reflect modern siege warfare, blockade, destruction of essential services. Final word. The case is a powerful modern asset. International law exists, but enforcement depends on political will and domestic courts' readiness to stop beyond political question doctrines. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. So, in sum, the UK High Court is interested in the activity being legal, not the activity which may lead to something illegal. That is crazy. I mean, I've literally just read the document and I asked ChatGPT in an expert manner to break it down. And Selling F-35 parts, ladies and gentlemen, is not illegal or breaching any international law. How do you expect peace from these people, huh? I'm going to recite an ayah from the Quran and call it a day. Surah Al-Baqarah, inshallah, ayah 11, 12. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون. صدق الله العظيم. In English, approximates as when it is said to them, make not mischief on the earth, they said, why we only want to make peace. Of a surety that they are the ones who make mischief, but they realize it not. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.